Trophy Dark was a unique and welcome experience for me when I first got the chance to play it. I've had several run-ins with more narrative-heavy games in the past, such as Heart and a weird cyberpunk version of PBTA, just to name a few, but they didn't really capture me the way Trophy Dark did. Heart is a game that I really enjoy for the world and immaculate vibes, and I would like to explore it further, but I found the insanely cool character ideas had mechanics that fought me constantly while trying to play it. However, I still love it and return to the book to read through it when I need inspiration or ideas. The other narrative games I played just had strange procedural systems or weird architecture that I found clunky compared to traditional games, and I didn't necessarily dislike them, but I found it hard to get immersed into them. But then, a friend of mine bought me Trophy Gold, Trophy Loom, and Trophy Dark after I'd expressed some vague interest from listening to Jason Cordova go on about it on the Fear of a Black Dragon podcast. So I decided to give it a try, and after running it once, I got instantly addicted and played several more games of it over the next 2 weeks, and it has shot to being one of my favorite tabletop RPGs since, and elements of the game have sunk their claws into me that I carry with me into other games. So what is Trophy Dark? Trophy Dark is a game created by Jess Ross about treasure hunters going into a sinister forest or other haunted location. We follow these doomed characters and tell the story of their mental and physical dismantling and descent into madness, debauchery, and death. Now, some of you might be checking out after that description, and that is completely fair. This is not going to be a game for everybody. I think anytime you try something new, your expectations need to be in the right place to properly enjoy it, and an issue fantasy gaming runs into is that people have preconceived notions about how it should play. Regardless of what side of the hobby you come from, nobody's immune to trying to mangle a game with different design goals into what they want it to be, leaving them with an unsatisfied experience. However, this is also just one of those games that will not be for everybody, even if you play it correctly, and that is okay. I like power fantasies and tabletop RPGs, but it isn't my default style, and even if it was, I like variety in my hobby. If you're somebody who's very precious about their characters and doesn't want bad things to happen to them, this game potentially is not going to be your bag. It's hard to describe, but there's a strange catharsis in telling the stories of these characters. Players are basically in as much control as the GM is in Trophy Dark when it comes to moment-to-moment events. You want things to get complicated or to go wrong because you're usually playing either cursed, corrupt, or flawed people, and seeing how far you can take it until they meet their end is just really fun. I think it's a mixture of schadenfreude and the same kind of fun people get from taking the ladder out of the pool in The Sims or deleting a section of a roller coaster in Roller Coaster Tycoon. Also, the fact that even though you are still at the whims of the dice, when it is time for your character to perish or be lost, it will feel like you have more control narrating the ending of their story than most trad games allow you to have. If you're a sick freak of a person, you're going to have fun with this, and even if you're not, I think this can be a really fun, irregular experience when you're in the mood for it. I think a closer tabletop RPG experience that has similar kind of fun would be Merkborg or DCC Funnels, not in how they play, but in a similar kind of brutality. Trophy Dark has a bit of a darker tone, while still being extremely funny at times from how dark it gets. Also, maybe I just have some things I need to work out in therapy, but I often play my characters regardless of the game like a stolen bike, and I want to see what awful shit will happen to them, so this game just lets me do that as the goal. If you're someone who knows they get kind of upset at losing or things going wrong, if this style of play does seem interesting, it is still something worth trying. Some of the people I've played Trophy Dark with are the kinds of players who get pretty unhappy when they fail roles in games with more traditional goals, but when they fail in Trophy Dark, they laugh maniacally and describe the most fucked up shit happening to their character. The context being changed really gives you a different perception about the characters you'll be playing and how the game should be going. It's also probably my favorite one-shot system. This is a game designed for one-shots, but you can probably stretch it out to a 3-shot depending on the session lengths and how much content you want to wring out of the incursions. What makes it such a fantastic one-shot system is that the mechanics are simple as hell and can be explained in about 20 minutes or less. And you can have a fully encapsulated and satisfying story told in a 4-hour session from beginning to end. If you do enjoy this game and or premise but want a longer version for campaigns, then I recommend Trophy Gold, but I won't be talking about that game today. Unlike my Shadow the Demon Lord video, the mechanics aren't quite as important here, or at least are not so numerous to be the main draw of the system, so I'm not going to be spending as much time on them. Do not get me wrong, the mechanics are fantastically sleek and streamlined to promote the exact kind of play that the game intends. With how few mechanics there are, you may be deceived in thinking how easy they were to create, but when you play the game, you realize how much thought and purpose was applied into making the gameplay so effortlessly. So let's dig into them. Alright, so Trophy Dark doesn't have many rules, but I will still not be covering every one of them in meticulous detail, since this is why you should play, not how to play. But I will still go over everything possible so that you're aware of what is here. Before we get to the main rules, I'm going to cover character creation so that you have proper context, because all the rules spider off of one main mechanic you'll be engaging with called the risk roll, and it'll be easier to explain once you understand the other terms. So character creation is very simple. You choose your character name and their pronouns, and then you pick their occupation and background. The occupation is your current role you serve in the party now, and your background is a life you left behind. Together they'll afford you 4 skills, which I'll explain when we get to the risk roll. After that, you'll choose your character's drive, which is simply the reason you hunt for treasure. I'll come back to this later as well. Then you can pick up to 3 rituals, which are spells. Each ritual you choose will give you 1 rune. You already start with 1 rune at the beginning of the game, so if you choose 3 rituals, you'll start the game with 4 rune marked. When you reach 6th rune, your character is lost to the forest and is either dead or now a new obstacle for the remaining treasure hunters, but is no longer in possession of the player who played them. In the case of this happening, since the game is collaborative anyway, players of dead characters become somewhat secondary or co-GMs, and so it isn't like they're kicked out of the game depending on how involved they and the GM want them to be. Also, when you mark a rune during play, you gain a condition. A condition is a physical or mental transformation that your character develops from delving deeper into the haunted forest. Due to this being a narrative game, this can be directly related, such as falling out of a tree and the condition being a broken arm, or it could manifest differently and be completely unrelated, such as noticing when you dust yourself off from the fall that you have growing scales in your hands that look eerily similar to the scales on the fishman you fought earlier. But back to the rituals really quick, the magic casting in this game is very loose. Every ritual is a single word and has a single sentence description, and you can manifest it in any way you want. If you're used to this style of game, this won't be anything new, but if you are new, to give you an example, let's look at the Haunt ritual. The description reads, summon a spirit to torment a creature. As you can tell, that is fairly fucking vague. There is no canon way it works or hard rules for it. When you use it in play, you describe how it works, or if you fail, how it doesn't. So maybe you can make the spirit look like a spectral hound that chases them, or have it appear as their dead husband screaming and asking why the creature let them die. You know, lighthearted fun. So let's finally talk about the risk roll. The risk roll is the core mechanic you'll be leaning on the most, and like every other mechanic in the system, it uses d6s only. When you attempt something that doesn't automatically happen, you make a risk roll. You take a light die if it is something you are skilled at from your occupation and background. You only take 1 light die even if multiple skills apply. Also, feel free to get creative with these. As an example, if you were trying to track where a skeletal fox wandered off to, and you had the skill Persistence, you might argue that you could use that to continue searching since you're so stubborn, you won't stop until you've scoped every possible inch of ground in the direction it went. But if you had the Trails or Hunting skill, you probably wouldn't even need to make an argument to make the same roll. You also take an extra light die if you take a Devil's Bargain. A Devil's Bargain is a deal either the GM or another player proposes that has an outcome that happens regardless of the roll. As an example, you are trying to swim across a raging river to the other side, and the GM might suggest a Devil's Bargain where you get the bounce die, but lose your crossbow in the river, and one of the other players might suggest a Devil's Bargain that you get the bounce die, but the rival party that you are racing against will be on the other side of the river waiting for you. If you want the bonus light die, you can choose between those two or however many Devil's Bargains the group throws your way, and that outcome will happen regardless of the roll, or you can refuse the bargain entirely to forfeit the bonus die. Finally, if your mind or body are being risked by whatever you're attempting or you're using a ritual, you roll a dark die, which I'll explain in a second. So if your highest die is a 1 to 3, you fail and things get worse. If you roll a 4 or 5, you succeed, but with a complication, and if you roll a 6, you succeed fully. However, if your highest die is a dark die, all that still applies except if the dark die is higher than your current rune, you mark 1 extra rune and gain a condition. If you are unhappy with your roll and your highest die is a light die, you can re-roll taking on an extra dark die. You can do this repeatedly, adding a dark die every time until you're happy with the result or your highest die is a dark die. Also, if you have no skills that work for the risk roll and take no Devil's Bargain, you'll only roll the dark die and have to deal with whatever consequences that entails. So explaining it out, that may feel like a lot, but it is very simple in play and you'll get used to it pretty fast. There are several other rolls, so I will really quickly mention them. Keep in mind that these are basically all the mechanics for this game to show you just how light it is. There's a help roll that a player can do when another player is attempting a risk roll. They put themselves at risk when they do, but it can be the difference in the roll succeeding or not. The next roll is the contested roll, which is where the player versus player elements come in. I've yet to have a Trophy Dark game that doesn't descend into player versus player on some level or another, which is thematically appropriate, so if you aren't cool with that, it is possible to play Trophy Dark without it, but I think that severely hinders the experience. In a contested roll, both players take a light die if they have a skill that matches what is being attempted, and 1 light die for each mark of ruin they have. They also both take a dark die for the inherent danger of this roll, and then they take as many additional dark dice as they are willing to risk without the other knowing how many they're going to roll. Whoever has the most 6s wins. In the case of a tie, then you count most 5s, then 4s, etc. You gain 1 ruin for each dark die that rolls a 1. These can be pretty crazy moments as people can take on like 20 dark dice, knowing that they will more than likely win, but also very likely die. Especially if they already have 4 or 5 ruin, so it is always exciting near the end of the game when contest rolls really start happening. Next is the ruin roll, which is essentially the sanity roll if you're used to other horror games. Basically, if you see something fucked up, you roll a dark die, and if that die is higher than your rune, you mark a rune and gain a condition. Finally, the last mechanic, the reduction roll. When you mark your 5th ruin, you can now reduce it for the rest of the game by acting in the forest's interests. Basically, by sabotaging the rest of the party, you can lower your ruin. You can keep reducing your ruin in this way for the rest of the game, even if you gain more ruin, but you can never take it below your starting ruin. So that's the lightning round for all the mechanics you need to remember, but before we get to the next section, I just want to quickly talk about online play. Playing Trophy Dark online is insanely easy and probably even faster than it is in person. For the dice rolling, you can just use this website, which I'll put the link for in the description. You can make a room and then roll whatever dice you need to while you play here for everybody to see. The other great tool is the Trophy Dark Character Keeper by Ben Bond, which I'll also put in the description. It is a Google Docs file that you can copy and use for the entire party's character sheets. The Character Keeper has step-by-step instructions on each character sheet to follow to make your characters so everybody can quickly cruise through creation and then all the information is right there in one spot. So it is super easy to use Discord or Zoom, whatever you're using for the voice chat, the roller for the dice, and the Character Keeper for the sheets. It takes basically no time to set up, costs nothing, and then you're good to hit the ground running. The last thing I want to cover on the half technical side is safety tools. When dealing with narrative games, especially ones with such a horror focus, safety tools are pretty important. If you're just playing with your friends, you probably know where you stand, or only need an informal chat about what is off the table, but even so, it is good to check in. Each incursion has a set of content warnings that will probably come up, so that is a good way to check if the incursion you want to run is for everybody that you want to play with. The game also has a page of safety tool procedures you can use, and the Character Keeper has an easy-to-use chart that players can just effortlessly tag what they aren't interested in engaging with. I'm not going to do a whole spiel on safety tools. You're more than likely a grown-ass adult who knows how to use safety tools, but just keep in mind how narrative games that have a lot more improv have the chance of really going off the rails, and they're good to have on hand so that nobody has a bad time. A Trophy Dark adventure is called an incursion. Incursions have a theme which are a single evocative word such as moss, blood, or sleep. If you're ever in doubt about what to expand upon while roleplaying, this theme is a great anchor to come back to. If you're new to the level of improv that Trophy Dark expects of you, it can be really daunting to come up with stuff on the fly, so using the theme might make it easier than just trying to come up with some horrific shit off the top of your dome. Also, if you mix this with stealing from media, especially horror media, you can usually come up with something, and even if it doesn't feel wholly original, another person at the table might use that as a springboard to make it into something even cooler or more disturbing. The collaboration between people describing how messed up something can be is where I think the system really shines. As an example, let's use the moss theme. Maybe you're somebody who has a discomfort towards eye trauma or just eye stuff in general, so you use your phobia to push the horror, and so for the condition, you describe that your right eye turns green and continuously drips moisture. Now that is pretty cool, but you might feel like you want to take it a bit further in the moment, or you might gain another condition and want to exacerbate this one instead of adding a new condition. So another person pipes in and says, what if you start to feel moss growing behind your eye, right in the socket, and has a persistent itch that you just can't quite scratch? And for a condition, either choice would probably be good enough depending on how far you are in the game, but the back and forth with the other players to see just how fucked up you can make the game is one of the strangest bonding experiences you'll have. Back to the incursions, they are divided into 5 rings, starting with ring 1. Each ring has elements that should try to push the players out of the haunted location while also having devious temptations to pull them even deeper. The rings aren't hard measured zones, but rather just a narrative and mechanical way to show how much deeper into the forest the players are getting, and the deeper they go, the more dangerous and bizarre encounters they will start to come across. You can stretch out each ring to be as long as you want, but for a one-shot, each ring should have in the game's words at least 1 terror and 1 temptation. Despite its name, the terror does not need to be a big, gross monster. It basically just means a dangerous or hostile encounter, and the temptation doesn't have to be treasure. It can be information or a personal tie-in to the characters. This is not a hard rule, and due to the style of play being so different from player to player, take what I say next with a grain of salt. But in my experience, I have found the earlier rings tend to be a bit longer as people get warmed up and into the right headspace, and talk more trying to figure out their characters, and more developments happen to call back later. The last 2 rings tend to go the fastest because the rising tension comes to a crescendo in these parts, as characters hunt each other down in the forest or the final location, fight over the treasure hoard, or have to contend with a large monster together, or any number of climaxes that the story was leading to. A really helpful aspect of this book is firstly that the book comes with 22 incursions for you already, which is such a fantastic bang for your buck. In an industry that can be known for chopping up content between several books for more sales, this one gorgeous hardcover or PDF is all you need to play, and you can buy more incursions or make your own as needed. The other helpful aspect is that in these incursions, each ring has possible conditions to give to the players if people are stumped on what conditions fit the ruin they have received. Also, each ring has little descriptive blurbs the game refers to as moments for you to use. These moments are great for transitioning into a new scene, ring, or encounter. They also work as flavorful instances to set the mood, atmosphere, or return to the theme as a grounding point for inspired collaboration. Okay, so that is the layout of a play session covered. Let's talk about the player side of the game now. So as mentioned earlier, you play as doomed treasure hunters entering a haunted location, which I will continue to refer to as the forest, since that is what the book does, even though it doesn't have to be set in a literal forest. A lot of your reason for doing this revolves around the drive you chose at character creation, and that can inform a good amount of your character. This is a game where your character grows and develops through play and emergent narrative, not one where you come fully prepared with a backstory. Let's take the drive, earn the right to your family's name. This drive can help you think of a lot of quick things in the beginning that might inform how you see your character. Are you an ostracized member searching for treasures that you can use both glory and gold to buy your redemption? Is this a cultural event that every young person has to go on a daring trial so that they can come back and claim a name based on their great deed to be considered somebody worth knowing or respecting? That is where you start. A vague reasoning why you're here and why you'll go to the lengths that normal people would never go to, and it's through play that you'll collaborate and further flesh out who your character is and what motivates them. You'll notice a lot of drives have references to named locations, factions, and stuff like that. There is no hard canon-based setting that you need to follow. There is Trophy Loom, which is a supplement book that is mostly for Trophy Gold that has a bunch of content to roll on and more lore stuff that you can use for both games, but is absolutely an optional purchase, and even that book leaves a lot open to interpretation. For example, let's say your character has the drive, buy your brother's freedom from Barstool Prison. In your game, Barstool Prison might be a never-ending underground complex of tunnels that forces the prisoners to work as enslaved miners until their debt is paid off. In my game, Barstool Prison might be a pocket dimension run by a demon that will let my brother go if I bring back a specific ruby crown that I believe is somewhere deep in this forest. These names are meant to evoke an image in your head that you can then bring to life at the table, not follow some sort of hard canon that can't be altered. So do not worry about saying the wrong thing, the world is what you make it as a group. This drive, your background and occupation is the starting skeleton of who your character is, but through collaboration and experience in the force and changing from it, you will get a fully fleshed character by the end. One of the things that Trophy Dark taught me that I have brought over to other games is how to ask players questions that kickstart their creativity. There is no way in hell I'm the only GM who has sat down and tried to pass the mic off to a player to give them their chance to lay down their creativity, just to get met with this deer in the headlights look for a few seconds because I did not give them something good to run with or bounce off of. These questions are still open-ended, but a bit more specific so that your brain has a foundation that you're working off of, instead of just trying to pick something interesting from the void between your ears. I'll use the first description in question from the Flocculent Cathedral as an example. The description is about a gang of forest bandits that are stationed nearby that are clearly in a rough and filthy state, but seemingly doing okay for themselves. The question you ask the players is, what sign does each treasure hunter notice that living on the edge of the mire takes its toll on those who dwell here in a way that city life never would? That question is far more evocative than just describing the bandits or just asking, hey, what do the bandits look like to you guys? Also, asking these kinds of questions early on primes the players for understanding that this will not be a game where they are passengers in the GM story or an outside interactive force, but sharing the driver's seat as well. This is a game that expects you as a player to be proactive in adding to the shared story, where the details you add outside of just your own character and backstory become reality a lot more than more traditional games. For example, one of the characters might mention how they seem to have really amazing large weapons made from the bones of creatures, and now if they fight these bandits, they might have to contend with whatever weapons that they described. However, I'm not going to overstay this point, since I think going deep into how to approach narrative games is a bit outside of the scope of this video, so let's move on to the GM section. Honestly, a lot of your job as a GM will fall into what was already previously discussed amongst moving the game through the different rings, knowing the different roles, and shepherding the story, but due to the joint collaboration and very rules-light system, this is a very easy game to run, so I'll be quick. The best thing to do is read the Game Master Principles section on page 24. This covers a lot in a fantastically written and condensed form. One of the best parts of this book, and why I'm trying to keep this video as short as possible, is that the book also tries to be as short as possible and does an extremely good job of not wasting your time. I've already covered a few things that are on this page throughout this video, but it also covers how you should make the stories dangerous and tragic, make the world feel haunted and hungry, as well as a few other things. One thing I personally recommend if you're near any kind of wilderness that you can go hiking in is to go do that. Even if it isn't a forest, actually going out yourself and experiencing nature with this in mind can give you a lot of ideas. The cold, wet darkness of a cavern, the stillness of a forest where you really can't easily see too far ahead of you, how loud your boots on sticks and dried leaves are when walking, the pitter-patter of rain on the canopy and your clothes. Actually going out if possible and remind yourself of what a forest or other wilderness location actually smells, feels, looks, and sounds like is not only a great place to start for giving flavorful descriptions, but also gives you ideas of how you can twist them as things get much, much worse the deeper they traverse. Back to the GM Principles page, it is an imperative and quick read, and I recommend if you get this book to look it over for yourself. I do it before every game because I like to refresh myself of what I should be striving for, but you don't need to be that precious about it if you get the gist. Similarly, there is a Player's Principles section on page 15 that I read out before the game. I don't do this for every game, but it is good to do if you have new players or if you haven't played in a while. It also does a good job of reinforcing that this is not like your typical game where the goal is stay alive and be as risk-averse as possible. During times where I haven't read this out, I have found some players forget this very crucial part of the game and don't take opportunities they should have or refuse risks that could have made the game more interesting. Even with the collaboration aspect where your hands aren't fully on the steering wheel, you are still somewhat of a mediator and leader for the session to make sure everybody is having fun. Keep in mind people's lines and veils or whatever safety tool system you're using, and one thing I think is extremely important before the game is stressing the player versus player nature of this game. The group will more than likely start out as a regular adventuring party with a common goal, but player versus player tends to be inevitable considering the morally dubious characters and the really terrible situations they find themselves in, along with your needling and pushing as a GM. The reason why this is so important is that there are a lot of people out there who do not like PvP and have violent reactions to it. This is not an aspect to spring upon the players because it's both a shitty thing to do, but you might also find yourself in a very awkward social situation, and I know from experience with nerds, that is a far more terrifying encounter than anything else you'll find in the forest. So be upfront about it, mentally prepare people for it, and also it will give people the option to nope out when invited if they don't think it is for them. I will mention that PvP in this does kind of hit different when your own character is potentially a piece of shit who probably deserves whatever is coming to them, but I know that's a hard line for some people regardless. You can play Trophy Dark without PvP, but I personally think it is one of the core parts of the game that really elevates it and leads to both hilarious, brutal, and absolutely messed up moments that you lose out on by omitting it. And I say that as somebody who has stopped playing more and more competitive board games and video games. For some reason, it just really works in Trophy Dark with the themes of the game. This is absolutely a game for smaller groups. I have met some insane people online who have these 7 to 12 player groups, which I don't think work well with trad games anyway. With Trophy Dark, I especially recommend 3 players for optimal playtime and collaboration and 4 players at most. I genuinely do not think this game works well with really big groups because you get into a too-many-cook situation, as well as the intimacy and loneliness that is a big part of this game is going to be felt less with a large band of 6 people or more traipsing around. Not to mention that the game has a large focus on internal conflict, so having fewer people to share the spotlight really goes a long way for a game that is designed for shorter playtimes. And to quickly mention reskinning incursions, I did one of the incursions in the book, The Plantation, but made it closer to Hunt Showdown, and it took literally 0 work to do, since in Trophy Dark you can just say what weapons and gear you have, and combat is resolved through the risk and contested rolls, and not with any varying damage dice rolls. So if you want to do something like a Warhammer fantasy game, you might need to change the name of some dryads or spells, but outside of that, you'd be able to run it as is, and the game would just depend on how much Warhammer lore you and your group know and how deep you want to go into it. I could see a really fun incursion for that being you guys going to check out a Warpstone meteor crash, or trying to move through Beastmen or Chaos Lands and trying to make it out unscathed and unchanged. Finally, the last thing I'll talk about in this section is making your own incursions. I'm going to keep this short because I have not done this myself, and this is just speculation. The big thing, just like running it, is having a theme to use as the base where all your ideas can flow from. Also, a general sense of what you want the final encounter to be should help, which can develop differently as you play through the incursion to fit more with the characters, as it should. For the middle rings, trying to find interesting ideas with a theme can be fun, but you can also just steal ideas such as the many weird locations found in Heart, or just making the encounters the way you would make them for traditional games, but maybe with more horror twists. Such as the players coming across a tree with several still-moving zombies impaled on the branches, each with glinting jewelry on their bodies, or a wild animal made up of rotting meat and flies, or any number of mundane or fucked up encounters depending on how far they are in the story, and just seeing how the players deal with the situation, and what you can tempt them with it as well in those weird and horrible encounters. Alright, I think I'm going to cut it off there. This is a very simple game, and if you follow the rules, player, and game master principles and use any of the incursions in the book, you won't have any issues. There may be some growing pains in terms of getting used to this style of game if you aren't used to it, but if you are used to narrative games, you'll get this in no time, and if you aren't, I bet you'll get a handle on it in either during or after your first game. There's also some actual plays online you can watch to get an idea for how it plays. I'll link one from Jason Cordova in the description. I also have one on my channel that I'll have appear in the top right cards, and you can also listen to it in podcast form on the Actual Play podcast. I will warn that unfortunately one player's gain was turned up way too high, so the audio for that one player isn't great on it, but the session gets really good the longer it goes on, so I highly recommend it if you can get past that. And I will absolutely do future ones with hopefully much better audio. I also know that Jason Cordova and some people use Trophy Dark for pre-written adventures designed for OSR games or old school games, but I have personally not tried that, so that is why I didn't cover that aspect. I'd rather not talk out my ass just to cover a base I know nothing about and steer anybody wrong. If I ever end up doing that, maybe I'll make a follow-up video on how to do that, or get somebody on who has to talk about it and explain what they did for that. As always, a huge thanks to my patrons. If you'd like to get videos a day early, occasionally vote on video polls, and get a cool purple name in the Discord, consider becoming a patron. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know what mess up stories you have for this game. I really enjoy reading the crazy stories this community has from their weird encounters with the different systems they play. In any case, have yourselves a good one, and stay safe out there.